All right. It's 13 minutes long. It's Jordan Peterson. It's Zarathustra's serpent. All right. Let's go. Yeah, I'll take a little intermission for this.
Been done in a while. Use philosophy to examine a current social issue and offer solutions. When I started this channel, more than 3 years ago, this was one of its main mission statements. I was reacting mainly to the rise of anti-liberal forces on the left, what we call the regressive left, who were dominating the online discourse. I tried to fight these regressives by offering liberal solutions to the issues they brought up. A bit later, we became troubled by the
Just what a very evoking symbolism here. Are trans women women? Lovely.
rise of anti-liberal forces on the right, what is called the alt-right, and I was doing the same for the issues they brought up. By now, however, it feels like the liberals are back in power. On both the left and the right, the online discourse is dominated by
Ah, yes. Shoe on head. Vanguard of the leftist movement. Oh my god. I don't care how old this video is. Showing Shoe on Head as the vanguard of leftism has never been accurate. And this video is only 4 years old, my guy. That's not that old.
liberals. It is time to go back to discuss the unresolved problems within liberalism itself. One issue that is still hanging is the issue of the rights of transgendered people, in which several liberal values seem to clash with one another, and it is not yet clear what the liberal position should be.
Okay.
I am going to take a look at it from my left-wing perspective, and say what I believe the liberal position should be. The question I will attempt to answer is,
Can't wait for his left-wing perspective.
are trans women women? It is a question on which I find both a regressive leftist answer of definitive yes, and a conservative answer of definitive no, to be deficient. Everything I say here applies to trans men as well, of course, but most recent arguments revolve around trans women, so I will focus on them. For starters, let's look at an answer provided by someone who is on the conservative side of the liberal spectrum.
But just for clarity, do you think a trans woman
Oh,
is
well,
a real woman?
there's Jordan Peterson. All right.
I don't really like the way those questions are formulated. I don't know what that means. What do you mean a real woman?
Well, I'm asking you, in your mind, it depends what you think a real woman is, but do you think a trans woman is a woman?
No,
Why not?
because I think that women are capable, generally speaking, of having babies, and they have female genitalia, and they have an XX chromosome, and I think the biological markers are relevant. It doesn't necessarily.
Which, again, if those are the criteria, you understand how his criteria is flawed if those are the criteria, because there are women who don't have just XX chromosomes. There are women who can't have babies, but have the other features of being a woman that Jordan Peterson lists. There are women who have vaginas but can't have babies. Again, already we've run into the fact that Jordan Peterson's own definition here is fatally flawed from the get-go.
Mean that I.
This is a circumstance of oh god, what's his name? The Greek philosopher that I love so much, who held up a chicken and said, behold a man. I forget his name. The sickness. Behold a man. Diogenes. There we go.
I don't think that people should be treated with respect and dignity if they happen not to fit easily into a gender category. That's a different issue.
Man, amazing how Jordan Peterson has gone even farther right on this issue. Now he sees a picture of a trans man and he flies into a frothing rage about how it's mutilation.
Yeah, this is not a good answer, and it weakens Peterson's position in his
Oh, there we
important
go.
fight for freedom of speech. This segment shows, once again, how much the intellectual dark web is in dire need of a philosopher, because philosophy can provide satisfying answers to such questions. Let me have a go at it.
Oh, let's please.
So how do we approach this question?
Zarathustra's
Well,
serpent.
let me take you back to a video I made about a year ago, which was called The Matt Fallacy. If you haven't watched it, I suggest that you do, as it will help you understand the argument I'm making
How old
here.
is that clip? It was 4 years
In
old
that
at the
video,
time this video
I
came
defined a
out.
certain fallacy employed by the regressive left. The fallacy is based on misrepresenting Western liberal society and arguing that it defines categories of people in an essentialist manner, meaning that it regards certain attributes as essential to the definition of that category of people. In the video we just saw, Jordan Peterson took an essentialist view on women and identified them as necessarily having certain attributes, such as XX chromosomes.
Yeah, this
For an
opens you up to
essentialist,
the
anyone who
Diogenes
doesn't possess that
response.
essential attribute does not belong to the category of women. Regressive leftists claim that Western society thinks like Peterson, and that this shows that it is an oppressive society. In response,
No. That's not the argument that's being made against Peterson's points. The argument against Peterson's points is that, like, that you would make for a broader society is that sex and gender are two different categorical distinctions, and that in the pursuit of, like, ascribing certain social niceties or civil rights, one should take that distinction into account and not simply force people into one category or the other against their will. That's the argument.
I argued that Western society defines categories of people by what Ludwig Wittgenstein called family resemblance. According to this idea, there is no attribute that is essential to a category. Instead, there are attributes that are typical to a category, and the more of those attributes one possesses, the more that individual belongs to that category. So there are no clear borders to a category, which would allow you to determine in each case whether an individual belongs to it or not.
This is interesting because it seems to be just a restating of, like, Aristotle's like form, like the idea of Aristotle, like the idea of the form, like there being an ideal sense of chairness that exists, but defining a chair itself would be a fruitless endeavor because there are so many different ways to configure a chair. Yeah.
However, since typical attributes usually go together, in most cases it is obvious if one belongs to a category or not. In the case of gender, it is almost always easy to tell if one is a man or a woman. But there are exceptions.
Citation needed, motherfucker. It's almost always easy to tell who is a man and who is a woman. How? What are your methods? What do you do? Like, how? Like, on what characteristics are you able to detect this? You know, because this is the thing, right? People say, specifically cisgender people, often say, we can always tell who's trans. We can tell who's a man and who's a woman. And you ask how, and they're like, oh, by looking at them. Like, oh, well, but I walk around in the world as a woman. Like, yeah, you're a woman. Like, but I'm a trans woman. Oh, well, you're not a woman. See, this is the thing, right? The argument that we can always tell, outside of a few exceptions, is flawed. You can't. But the thing is, Cezanne, that's incorrect, right? And the point that is being made by that he's kind of running into is the fact that he is incorrect. That is most certainly correct. It's not, though. How do you know when you interact with somebody who's a man and who's a woman? How do you know? Watch the video? I'm asking you, how do you know? You've seen the video. How do you know? You said it's most certainly correct, so it seems to me that you have an idea. How do you know? Generally speaking, for most people with secondary sex traits, normative for female reproduction, such as breast or vaginas, are women, and the opposite is true for men. Wait, so you're going around and seeing people's breasts and vaginas? Like you walk into a room and you're like, I need to see your breasts and or vaginas. Like that's how you go about your life? Do you have like X-ray vision? Do you have like a TSA scanner like behind your eyeballs? I can almost always see the form of one's breast or the shape of someone's genitals through their clothes. Okay, that's Okay, well that was the weirdest possible way to answer that. Um okay, the issue being that you can be wrong about those things. Like, people can wear padded bras, there are breast forms, people, hell, there are even, like, vulva forms, like, and you would know that it is easier to be duped by these characteristics, or to be, confused and bemuddled by these characteristics if you would go to a drag show. You know? Go to, like a drag show and maybe bring like your older friends, coworkers, parents, whatever, grandparents, um because there is a good chance they won't be able to tell who's a cross-dresser, who is a drag queen, etc.
Ever hear of tuck tape?
No, like, I'm not saying that either of you said that you can always tell. But what you said, and I'm going to quote it here, is that you generally can tell, and that is most certainly correct. Except what you are talking about is reading social cues. It's reading external social cues that are broadcast to society, right? And making an assumption based off of those social cues. When really, the best way to tell what somebody's gender is simply to ask them. And that's kind of the problem I'm having here, is because you are skipping that step and going straight to, well, I can generally just assume what people's genders are, and I'm fairly correct on that point. But you could just ask and be 100% correct. You know? That seems like a fatal flaw in the way that you're going about trying to solve this problem, right?
Individuals are not so easily defined, and liberal society accepts that these individuals exist and doesn't try to force its categories on them. Transgendered people are one of these exceptions. Trans women are individuals who were born biologically male and were therefore considered boys, but as they grew up they realized that they feel like a woman. This has two manifestations. Either they feel alienated to their male body and want to have female body parts, or they feel alienated to masculine behavior and would rather behave in a feminine way. Usually it's both. They start to transition, gradually becoming more womanly in look and behavior, and often also have plastic surgery to alter their anatomy. If it goes well, they reach a point in which they have more feminine attributes than masculine attributes. At this point, according to the family resemblance principle, they become women. Some people...
Okay, but no. See, part of the issue here is that this relies on the social fabric of society. Because again, what is considered masculine, what's considered feminine, varies from society to society, from time to time, and from place to place. Like, for example, what's considered feminine in the Deep South at like a debutante ball is going to be different than what's considered feminine at like, in the New York club scene in the 90s. Like, these are going to be different standards of femininity, you know? And that's not just going to be addressed by like going on hormones. It's also going to be addressed by learning the tropes of that society and being able to fit in. Yeah.
People deny that humans can have a gender that isn't defined by their biology, and refer to trans women as men. I categorically reject this position. This is not a liberal position. A trans woman is not a man. But the question then becomes, is she a woman?
Man, what a wonderful image to use in your video. That's totally not offensive.
Or is she something else, a different category? The question we are basically asking is being trans an attribute or an identity? If it's an attribute, then she is a woman. She is a woman who is trans, in the same way that you can be a woman who is tall, a woman who is blonde, or a woman who is Portuguese.
That's literally yes, that's why the words are again, this is why the words are formulated the way that they are. That's why when people talk about trans women, they don't usually add a hyphen between trans and woman, because they're using it as an adjective to describe the kind of woman they are. You know, you can be a black woman, you can be a white woman, you can be a straight woman, you can be a gay woman, you can be a bi woman, you can be a trans woman, you can be a cis woman. There's no difference between any of these categorizations of women. It's just a different kind of woman. But this video is now going to go on to argue that it is indeed a secret third thing.
If it's an identity, then she is a trans woman, something different from a woman.
I have that
The
sneaking
latter
feeling
option is the
anyway.
one people like Jordan Peterson espouse, and earlier I said that it is an unsatisfying answer. But if we say that trans women are women, we run into a whole host of problems which are currently being played out in our culture. Can we come up with a better answer? Well, let me take you back to something else I talked about in the math fallacy video. I presented Wittgenstein's concept of language games. Wittgenstein points out that our everyday language doesn't have one set of rules, but is actually a collection of many language games, each with its own set of rules. Within a language game, a certain term can have a slightly different meaning than in another game, because the context is different. When we speak, we constantly switch between those language games, and usually we are capable of doing so and still understand one another. I also pointed out that in some language games, things are defined in an essentialist way. As an example, I gave a hypothetical case in which we discover a liquid that is like water in every single way, except that its chemical composition isn't H2O. I said that in this case it would be correct for all of us to refer to this liquid as water, except for the chemist, because in the language game of chemistry, water is rigidly defined as H2O, and chemistry would break down if it didn't take this essentialist approach.
Is this restated? Is this just like poorly restating Vosh's argument about agua?
Let's apply this to our case. Are trans women women? Yes, in general. But there are certain language games in which they are not.
In general.
And as a society, we have to determine what these language games are. Determining these language...
again, I do have to say it's pretty rich to talk about language games while misspelling trans women, but okay.
And as a society, we have to determine what these language games are. Determining these language games is what we should be focused on. And once we do, we will be able to solve the problems that we are dealing with today. Let's say that I am having a regular conversation with a trans woman. If she looks and acts like a woman, then
Oh boy. Let's say I'm having your average, normal, run-of-the-mill, regular conversation with a trans woman. But then she says something shocking and masculine. Okay.
and I'll feel like I'm talking to a woman. I know this for sure, because I've experienced this situation. It is also possible that I experienced it without knowing that I'm talking to a trans woman. And if you were that woman, you had no obligation to inform me about it. I have no need to know about this any more than I need to know that you dye your hair. But let's say I then make a pass at you, and you are interested. In this case, you have to immediately make sure that I know that you are trans. Because we have just switched into the language game of courting, of romance, and in this language game, this attribute is an essential part of your identity. When a man is romancing a woman, it is partly based on certain assumptions he makes about her anatomy, and not making him aware would constitute a deception. Even if
I disagree, actually. I think it would be safe. I think it would be best practices for the trans woman to let their partner know that they're trans as soon as, like, flirtation starts. But I still don't know that there's an inherent obligation any more than, like, I don't know, a cis woman who has some kind of, like, disease that might affect her quality of life, but wouldn't necessarily infect the said man. And I know that this is a problematic comparison, but just roll with it for a minute. Like, I don't think you are under any obligation to reveal your entire health history, that you had your, like, gallbladder removed, that you had your, you know, your tonsils out, you had a close run-in with you know, whatever. I don't think you are required under any circumstance to go into, like, your whole entire history just to make sure that you're not committing such a deception. Now, that's because of the evolution of my species. Yeah, because you're a different species than us, right? Wait. Suzanne, this is actually really important. Do you think that men and women are different species? It might be an ad world, that's true. So yeah, I just think that I guess the main thing here is I disagree that this is a deception. I would agree that for the trans woman's safety, she should reveal that her trans status. Mainly because in our society, if those certain assumptions aren't fulfilled, it can lead to a violent retribution against her, right? Let's see here. Wait, Suzanne, do you think that men and women are different species? Just out of curiosity. Okay. Now, I want to point out here a couple of things, right? That back up the point I was making earlier before we started watching this video. Men and women are the same species. Cool. Glad you're not living in Crazy Town on that one.
Identity. When a man is romancing a woman, it is partly based on certain assumptions he makes about her anatomy, and not making him.
Now, here's the thing, right? The assumptions made on someone else's anatomy, that's a cultural issue. That's not a hardwired issue. This is something that is taught to be ingrained into them from an early age. Boys have penises, girls have vaginas. And, like, this message is reinforced time and time again. But we could change that assumption. We could, for example, imagine a society in which people didn't make those assumptions upon talking with someone and bothered to, for example, ask. And this is kind of the thing I'm getting at here, which is that we could have a society that operates differently than the one we have now. And we know that society could be different because we see tons of examples around the world throughout history of society operating differently. So what is being argued for here is simply that the onus shouldn't be on trans women to be like constantly forthcoming about their entire medical history. The onus should be on everyone to not make assumptions based on like what makes their dick hard. Based on like what they find attractive. Don't make those assumptions, just ask. If you just ask, then all of this is not a social like faux pas at all. Some aspects of society could be different, but some couldn't. Which aspects of society couldn't be different? Again, you are the one saying that there are eternal, necessary components of society that cannot be changed. Which ones are those? Also, folks, we've been going for about 4.5 hours. Please consider hitting the follow button, hitting the subscribe button, hitting the like button, and dropping some subs or donos because, man, this feels like banging my head against a wall. Those which are ingrained into human nature due to evolution, which ones are those? If they're so ingrained that they are inseparable from your existence as a human being, then it should be really easy for you to tell me which ones are unchangeable aspects of society. You're the one making the argument. You should know. Wittgenstein was only interested in linguistics. You can't extend that to all categories of things. Well, I mean, Aristotle certainly did. It would be wonderful if we lived in a world where it was safe for every trans woman or man to announce that to potential partners. I'm so glad I stopped making those assumptions. Yeah, it's great. Man, it's kind of crazy how difficult the question of which of these social structures is unchangeable. It's crazy how difficult the time you have answering that question.
Him aware would constitute a deception. Even if you had all the operations, you are still obliged to inform him that you are trans, because he might be the kind of man who is only interested in women that can give birth.
I'm sorry. Then he should make that clear, because assuming that a woman is capable of giving birth is an additional assumption on his part. Not every woman with a vagina can give birth. So the argument here has now expanded, right? His argument is now not only should trans women, reveal their trans status, but cis women should reveal that they can't, like when they're barren, when they can't give birth. I gave you men being more competitive than women earlier. Here's another one. Women are generally more agreeable in negotiation than men. Those aren't social structures. Those aren't social expectations. I'm talking about cultural expectations and assumptions. These can absolutely be changed. Culture and society can change. That's demonstrable. That's a fact. To say that they can't is simply incorrect. It flies in the face of all of human history. Does that run the other way? Should men be required to get sperm count tested and tell women when they're low? Maybe. Those are aspects of human nature which have an impact on society, which are immutable. Again, the argument here that it is insane to me that you're trying to argue from an evolutionary perspective that certain traits are immutable. You understand what evolution is, right? You understand you're arguing against the inherent nature of the phrase and the reality that you're arguing from. You're building your entire philosophical idea here on sand.
In short, in your regular everyday life, you are a woman who is trans, but when it comes to romance, you are a trans woman. Recently, there has been an issue with trans women going into beauty salons and asking for a bikini wax. If they
By immutable, I mean immutable in the sense that for now, unless we wait another 3,000 years. Oh, wait. So you're saying that 3,000 years ago, human nature was different? And that it might be different now from what it was 3,000 years ago? I thought it was immutable. I thought you were arguing that the hunter-gatherer nature is hard-coded into our brains to this day. That's interesting, because it seems like you have now completely defeated your own argument. Pathetic. Keep digging that hole, bud.
still had penises, some of the
They
workers
haven't
refused
heard
to
of
service them,
matriarchal
and
societies?
trans
Oh, cool. It's this story about a lady who was denied a bikini wax. Yeah, no. See, here's the thing. It's totally fine to deny people with penises, like to say, oh, I only give vaginas waxes. That's actually completely fine and normal for bikini waxing places. We've gone over this case on stream before.
activists try to turn this into a human rights issue. The claim is that if you deny trans
And also, this is disingenuous framing. One trans woman made this a human rights issue. And it was a silly issue that went nowhere because, again, it's totally fine and has always been fine for waxing places to designate whether they service penises or vaginas. There has never in history been a matriarchal society. Okay, you say that right up until a shoe hits you on the side of the head, bud.
women the same service that you give other women in this one case, you are basically saying that they are not women. The answer to that is no. If we say that in some context you are not a woman, it doesn't mean that we deny it in general.
Again, they wouldn't have denied her the wax if she had had bottom surgery. If she had a vagina, they would have done the wax because they did vaginas. This isn't even a difficult case. Wait, isn't that the Jessica Yaniv case? Yeah. Jessica Yaniv was in the wrong and is also incredibly creepy and gross. I hate that this case is constantly referenced as like a trans activist case when it's like, no, one really creepy trans person did like a really creepy thing.
In this case, I think most of us will agree
It's
that
true, I'm familiar with La Chancla.
having a penis makes an essential difference, and thus makes trans women a different category. Society should provide a solution that will allow them to have a bikini wax.
Yeah, you just specify that you only wax vaginas, or you only wax penises, or you wax both. Then trans women who have had bottom surgery can go to the vagina place or the one that does both. Trans women who haven't done bottom surgery can go to the one with the penis or the one that does both. This isn't like rocket science. It's not hard to figure out. This isn't even like the weird like crossover case that he's trying to make it seem like. You can just be more inclusive about your language. You don't have to say trans people not allowed. You can just say like we only service certain anatomy. That's fine. Trans women have both. Trans men have both. It's fine.
Is not to force beauty salons to treat them as if they were women.
No, the solution is to have beauty salons treat trans women as women, but for their services to be contingent on the type of genitals that they're servicing. This isn't difficult.
Context in which this question is a hot button is sports. The argument made by trans activists is that trans women should be allowed to participate in women's sports, and
Yep.
denying them that possibility is discrimination.
Boy hate the Yaniv case cause she quite clearly has mental issues and these assholes act like she is the mascot for trans people.
True.
In contrast, we are seeing some places taking an essentialist view of gender, which can lead to absurdities like the case of Mac Beggs, a Texan trans man who wants to wrestle against boys, but the state forces him to wrestle against girls, which he easily defeats. This just goes to show how dumb the essentialist view is. I assume that Beggs is taking testosterone injections.
He is.
How can it possibly be fair to other girls to have him in the competition? The answer to the trans activists' demand has to be different, and it begins by pointing out that women's sports are exclusionary by nature. They exclude people who do not have a female biological system.
No. Oh. Again, this would be solved if this person knew anything what they're talking about. HRT, there are tons of studies about this, how HRT affects sports performance in trans women in particular. HRT, after a year to 2 years, depending on the person, brings like their body down to the level of athletic performance they would have if they were a cis woman. This has been verified over and over again. There are some lingering things like blood oxygen or like the blood oxygen levels or like a slight amount of bone density, but like within the normal range that cis women tend to have. Like, we're talking averages here. Obviously, there are going to be cis women playing sports who are going to have higher than average bone density. We're going to have cis women playing sports who have higher than average height. We're going to have a lot of different outliers when it comes to sporting performance, when it comes to cis women. Trans women, by all accounts, from all of the data I've seen, fall within the acceptable range of difference between cis women that we already allow within cis women's sports. Does it matter when they start it? My understanding is, generally speaking, it takes about a year to 2 years. I think from what I've seen, it tends to take longer to reach parity if they start while they're older. But the younger they start, the less time it takes. So, like, if they've been on hormone blockers, for example, and then they just get right on HRT, like, they're basically good to go, you know? If they're starting like early college, then it might take them a year. They're starting in their 30s, 40s, 50s. It might take them two years, generally speaking, in like the prime athleticism years. It might take longer on like the higher end of aging, but those studies haven't really been done, to my knowledge.
Male sports, on the other hand, are not exclusionary. We do not say that Shaquille O'Neal has an unfair biological advantage and therefore he cannot play basketball. Unless we'll find that Shaq's mother was inseminated by an alien giant species, he is eligible. Women are not excluded either, if they are good enough. You can see it in chess, where men are better, but women are good enough to give them a competition. So in chess there is a world championship, in which both men and women can compete, and the Women's World Championship, in which men are excluded. Now, when you have an exclusionary field, you have to decide where to draw the line, and due to the diversity of human nature, with some individuals it's not going to be clear which side of the line they fall on. You see it in the current debate around Caster Semenya, an Olympic gold medalist and a 2-time world champion in the 800-meter run. Semenya is a woman, but her anatomy, it is rumored, has some male elements in it.
It is rumored. Caster Semenya is a cisgender woman who has higher than average levels of testosterone. That's it. Her body naturally produces more testosterone. That's it. This is why we talk about a bimodal spectrum of sexual characteristics, right? She operates on like a different level than like most cisgender women. And that's okay.
The argument around whether or not she should be allowed to compete against women has been going on for years, and recently it was decided that she can do so only if she takes drugs to reduce her testosterone levels. This debate will probably go on, and it just goes to show how there is never a clear border when it comes to imposing different categories on the diversity of nature. So the issue here involves not just trans women. It is a bigger issue of deciding where the line is for eligibility to compete in women's sports. As for trans women, the International Olympic Committee has decided back in 2003 that they should be allowed to compete in women's sports, as long as they had all the operations undertaking female hormones. There hasn't been much of a kerfuffle about it, but I suspect it is because there have not been any really successful trans women athletes yet. In 2018, a trans woman became a world cycling champion, causing uproar and sparking a debate, and we will probably see more of it in the future. We should not allow trans activists to turn this into a human rights issue. The question here is where we draw the line, and whether or not the hormones that trans athletes take sufficiently suppress their biological.
Yeah, no shit. The question is where we societally draw the line. And where we draw the line is is determined by us collectively agreeing and advocating and like going back and forth. That's like it's a social construct.
Advantage. Alright, I think we can now answer the question.
Do you think a trans woman is a woman?
Yes, but there are some instances in which she is not. There are some contexts in which being trans makes an essential difference that defines her from other women. As a society, we should generally treat trans women as women, but also
just real quick, I want to take a look at this list and the corrections. Trans women are women, correct? No complaints here. Trans women are women when they do all the stuff they do. Incorrect. That was not demonstrated by this video. This includes when they do athletics. This was not at all backed up by this video. This video actually presented no data or sourcing regarding its opinion on trans people's inclusion in sports. It simply went with vibes, which is not a good or compelling argument. IMO, feminism has to be intersectional and trans-inclusive. Catastrophic. This actually was not at all addressed in the video. I'm wondering what exactly is catastrophic about feminism taking into account the different experiences of women in society. That seems weird to call taking into account other experiences of women in society as catastrophic, but that's strange. Who's with me? Totalitarians. If the takeaway from this is that you believe that it is totalitarian to insist that trans women are women and should be afforded like the experience of womanhood, that's a really weird position to take. That's, again, not at all backed up by anything presented in this video.
Also decide the instances in which we treat them differently. If you are a transgender person, you should realize that this answer does not discriminate you. What I have said about trans women is true in many other cases as well. People who have diabetes, for instance, are usually treated like everyone else, but in some contexts we designate them as diabetics, and treat them differently.
Yeah, but we could, for example, come up with different ways we contextualize trans women where that is appropriate to be brought up. For example, in the earlier part of the video where he's like, it's incumbent on trans women to reveal that they're trans status. Well, we could just not have the men making assumptions, right? We could simply change the underlying assumptions or change the basis upon which those assumptions are made by simply asking. When it comes to trans people in sports, that's a far more like, well, socially guided for sure. It's also based on like empirical data. Data I have looked at and presented on stream at length, but is not presented or gone over at all in this video. Suzanne, I've never made any comment today that is hated on men. That's your interpretation. I have said, and I have belittled your ideas. That's true. But that isn't a knock against all men. That's just a knock against you. Because your ideas are bad. And this video was bad. And it wasted all of our time and achieved nothing. I like men. Men are cool. Men have some good ideas sometimes. Women are cool and have some good ideas sometimes too. But this was not one of those times. Your video was bad. You don't even know what I advocate for. Like, you're trying to argue that making an assumption based on someone's appearance is an inherent human characteristic, and that then operating along social lines on that assumption is an inherent human characteristic. I can tell you, I've worked with kids, as a camp counselor. I can tell you, you can treat children, you can like train children, can teach them how to not make those assumptions. You can teach them to just ask when they need something. You can teach them to ask when they have a question, even, or when they don't understand something. And all I'm asking from a grown adult men in a circumstance where they're talking with a woman that they want to have sex with is for them to ask a basic question they want to know the answer of. I'm asking the same thing of them that I would like a 5-year-old. I'm not a grown adult man. We can tell. You're buying into regressive leftist propaganda and agenda pushing that denies human nature, and that society isn't just a system of oppression, but a complex mishmash of human nature and human creativity, both of which are necessary to form a healthy society. Yeah, but the issue is part of that creative mishmash can oppress certain groups of people. Like you oppress one group of people and it elevates another, right? The goal that I'm advocating for is recognizing this oppression so that we can stop doing it and that we can all exist equally on similar terms. All I'm asking for is that you don't make assumptions and put the burden of emotional and like mental labor on other people because you're too cowardly to ask a simple question. And you're trying to say in response to that, well, it's just human nature for me to not ask that question. And that just seems silly to me. That seems silly and lazy and cowardly. And none of the arguments you've presented are compelling at all. You're just saying, oh, well, it's always been human nature since hunter-gatherer times before recorded history. And that's very convenient for you, I guess. But it's not a good argument. It doesn't seem to be all that accurate of an argument. And I would suggest that you do more study on anthropology, history in general, etc. And probably also on philosophy, because this wasn't a great philosophy video, if I'm being completely honest. And like, I'm not an expert on philosophy. I only took one course of it in university, but it was bad.